where there was much less obvious damage. Richard Rotans had to assess the damage to Tower 7, and crucially, he saw the south face just after the North Tower had collapsed, slamming debris into it.
We're looking at the upper floors at Tower 7. You can see columns gone, floors collapsed, heavy smoke coming out, and fire. The upper floors were an inferno.
And then he had to go into that building to assess it.
You could hear the building creak above us. You could hear things fall. You could hear the fire burning. You could see columns just hanging from the upper floors, gaping holes in the floors up above us. There was an elevator car that was blown out of its shaft and it was down the hall. This is, you know, the massive impact from the fall of Tower 1 onto Tower 7.
We need volunteers for first aid. We have water, we have a little water here. Raid the buses, raid the trucks.
One photographer was able to get close to Building 7 because he was an honorary deputy chief in the fire department. These are some of his pictures.
You could see that part of the south part of the building was damaged heavily. There was a big hole in the building on the whole corner of the side of the building on the south side. And you could see part of the building is bowed out a little bit. It was, to me, that's major structural damage. And there's smoke on a lot of floors on the south side of the building. And I saw fire coming out some of these windows. And that, through my experience of taking fire photography for the last 30 years, to me that's an indication of extremely heavy fire condition and a dangerous fire condition.
The architect, Richard Gage, is not impressed. He says the smoke on the south side may not be from Tower 7 at all.
This is indicative of a negative pressure which drew the smoke from the World Trade Center 6 or 5 that was burning quite severely. And there's no visible flames in any of that smoke. So it appears to not be coming from World Trade Center 7.
It was from number 7. The smoke was coming out of the building, not going from the opposite direction. That's insane. It was coming out of the windows. You see it on the video, you see it in the still pictures. There was heavy smoke, numerous floors had fire on it.
The small pockets of traveling fires in this building, of which the official report claims there's about 10, we see maybe 5 or 6 from the outside, were not sufficient to weaken this building, modern fireproof steel frame building, to cause a global catastrophic collapse at free fall speed.
But a fireman who was there on the day is clear about the intensity of the fire.
We saw the fire and the smoke on the south side of Building 7. A lot of damage, a lot of damage. And the smoke, tremendous amount of smoke. I couldn't tell what floor it ended at.
And he also saw the east side of Tower 7.
The windows on approximately 10th to 15th floor of Building 7 started to fail from the heavy fire inside. We looked at it and said, there's so much fire in this building, nobody's going to put this fire out.
Then after being told there was nothing more they could do to save Building 7, he walked away and witnessed its collapse.
We heard it sounded like a jet engine, and we looked over the buildings, you could see the top of Building 7, and it just started to shake and then just disappeared down. And it was down in about 7 or 8 or 9 seconds. It was just gone. I saw the fire, I saw the damage, and that was good enough for me. I never heard any charges, I never heard any sequence of explosions, timed explosions.
In the last few years, the scale of the alleged conspiracy has grown and grown. Not just the government and foreign intelligence, but police, fire service, and even the media.
Now, more on the latest building collapse in New York. You might have heard a few moments ago. We'll probably find out more now about that from our correspondent, Jane Stanley. Jane, what more can you tell us?
Well, only really what you already know. Details are very, very sketchy. There's almost...
But Tower 7 hadn't collapsed.
Where did CNN and BBC get their information, especially considering the building was still standing directly behind their reporters?
Well, I think you have to put it in the context of what was an incredibly chaotic day. The investigations we've carried out suggest we were working on the basis of an incorrect news agency report. We had this statement from Reuters. What it says is, on September the 11th, 2001, Reuters incorrectly reported that one of the buildings at the New York World Trade Center, 7 WTC, had collapsed before it actually did.
Do you think that's suspicious?
Not really. I didn't even really, to be honest with you, I didn't even want to put that line in. But, you know, I'm not the only person on the team. I do think it's a little embarrassing on both the part of CNN and BBC.
Even more embarrassing, the BBC lost key tapes of its 9/11 coverage. But we found them. It turned out they'd been put back on the wrong shelf. 2002 rather than 2001. Cock-up rather than conspiracy.
Our correspondent, Jane Stanley.
What of the reporter herself? She's never talked about this before. Jane Stanley was a world affairs specialist and had just arrived in New York. The BBC quickly found a place to interview her, but she had precious little information to go on.
I was thrown, not a question, but a statement of fact. I don't know where that came from.
Jane, what more can you tell us about its collapse?
Well, only really what you already know. Details are very, very sketchy. I mean, it's very, very difficult being in that position where you've got no communications, no access to information, and that just comes out of left field. Details are very, very sketchy. It was very upsetting about a year ago because of the level of persecution and the virulence in which I was spoken about. And it's just very unfortunate that this whole conspiracy kind of, I think, rather ridiculous situation has grown out of what's really a very small and very honest mistake.
Well, unfortunately, I think we've lost the line with Jane Stanley in Manhattan.
Even the way the interview ended is seen by some as evidence of a conspiracy. The BBC says there's a simple explanation for the interview ending abruptly. The satellite feed had an electronic timer, which cut out at 5:15 exactly.
Is the Alex Jones Show on News Radio 590 KLPJ.
Boom, there's a huge explosion. There's dead people all over the lobby, and the cops are saying, don't look at them, because remember, they say nobody died. But, folks, we have them. This is so huge.
Every word used by eyewitnesses is picked over in a relentless search for a hidden truth. Conspiracy talk shows and websites seized on an interview for loose change with a crucial witness, Barry Jennings. There's no evidence that anyone died in Tower 7 on 9/11. But did Barry's interview suggest something else?
The amount of detail that Barry gave us in this interview is unreal. He says he was stepping over dead bodies in the lobby.
Trouble is, Barry Jennings himself disagrees with their interpretation of his words.
I didn't like the way, you know, I was portrayed. They portrayed me as seeing dead bodies. I never saw dead bodies.
Lobby of nice escalators.
But Dylan Avery has a recording of his interview, and he's unrepentant.
And the firefighter that took us down kept saying, do not look down. And I kept saying why. He said, do not look down. And we're stepping over people. And you know you can feel when you're stepping over people. That's how...
I didn't take anything out of context.
I said it felt like I was stepping over them, but I never saw them. And, you know, that's the way they portrayed me, and I didn't appreciate that, so I told them to pull my interview. Do I think that our government would do something like that to its people? No. I honestly don't believe that. Well, I know that I was in there, heard what I heard, saw what I saw.
In New England, the claims of the mysterious melted steel from Tower 7 has been unraveled. The scientist who tested the steel is adamant it wasn't caused by unconventional explosives like thermite.
Well, it was attacked by what we determined was a liquid slag. When we did the analysis, we actually identified it as a liquid containing iron, sulfur, and oxygen. You can see what it does is it attacks the grain boundaries, and then this bit would eventually have fallen out, and it would continue the attack.
Professor Sisson says it didn't melt, it eroded. The cause were those very hot fires in the debris after 9/11 that cooked the steel over weeks. When a NASA plane flew over Ground Zero after 9/11, the temperatures recorded were remarkably high. The highest temperature within Tower 7's footprint was 727 degrees centigrade.
I don't find it very mysterious at all. that if I have steel in this sort of a high-temperature atmosphere that's rich in oxygen and sulfur, this would be the kind of result I would expect.
With no steel from Tower 7 to study, investigators at the National Institute of Standards and Technology created the most complex computer simulation of a building collapse ever made. NIST reconstructed the entire skyscraper right down to the smallest bolt, and then set fire to it.
Single computer run in the case of World Trade Center 7 took 8 months compared to 2 months for the towers.
Scientists are certain the building collapsed because of fires that started when Tower 1 fell.